This is a short series of interviews with musicians, composers, improvisers who are part of the Outsound New Music Summit. And this year, on the 11th annual Outsound New Music Summit, I'm talking with Matthew Goodheart, who will be performing on July 19th at the Community Music Center. So thanks for joining me.
Oh yeah, it's great.
Having a conversation. A lot of times when I'm talking to people, I ask them the loaded question of, what are your roots? What is the beginning of your musical journey, so to speak? You know, do you have memories of that? When did you start?
It's interesting. I don't know when I started.
Oh, really?
I've played piano and done music as long as I remember. And my mom likes to tell the story of when they got the piano first brought to their house. It was the piano she had as a child, and then it got delivered to my parents' house. And I went up and played it right away, and apparently I sat down and started playing this thing, and I told her, write this down. This is the wind. It's called The Wind.
Really?
So, yeah.
Oh,
so apparently I was
how old were you?
composed of 3 or something.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. So there was always music in our house, and there was always a piano. So I was naturally drawn to it, and I just never remember a time where I didn't play. That involved creating my own music as well. So
you just started improvising right out of the baby shoes, practically.
I guess.
Right.
I was too young. I don't remember, but that's what I understand.
So your parents were musicians, or
My mother,
in music?
my mother played piano a bit. My mother's a sculptor and a painter, and does pastels and teaches. And she took piano as a kid, and had even, I guess, thought of being a professional musician at some point. But then she stopped for a while, and when she wanted the piano in the house. And so it was there, and I started taking, my brother started taking, and at one point the whole family was actually taking lessons.
Wow.
But I was the only one it stuck with. So.
Really? Okay. Yeah. So, wow, okay. And
I was also lucky, actually. In the neighborhood where I grew up, the couple of guys across the street were also musicians. They were a few years older than me.
Okay.
A piano player and a drummer. So we all got together really early on, especially me and Steve. Steve O'Shea, actually, he's still in the Bay Area.
Yeah.
I don't know if you know the name.
I've heard that name, yes.
Yeah, he's still in the Bay Area.
Yeah.
And we, grew up playing piano together, actually. Right. And he was a little older than me, so it was he was always a little better, and I always had to practice to keep up,
Okay, you're right. So you grew up here in the Bay Area?
Yeah, I did, actually,
right.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I've been in the Bay Area most of my life.
Right. So you've started out really early, a lot of training, playing piano, and
training was mostly private lessons.
Was that as you went through, like into school, high school, like you were?
Yeah, I started with sort of traditional piano, classical lessons,
sure.
And then there was a point where that just wasn't working for me anymore. About
yeah, when was
seventh
that?
grade.
Okay.
I had hit the stormy preteens and or young adolescents, and so I was really frustrated with my piano teacher at the time, and I think, we were all frustrated with each other.
Sure.
And my parents were always really supportive and enjoyed my creativity. So they tried to seek out another teacher for me. And my dad knew Denny Zeitlin, the jazz pianist.
Yeah.
And it called Denny up, and Denny recommended Alaudin Matthew, or W.A. Matthew, or Bill Matthew, he's also known as, who lives up in Sebastopol. And he's actually, he still is the best teacher I've ever had. He's a master teacher. We're still in touch. I go see him about once a year. And so he was able to engage really creatively with me. He had this incredible blend between sort of, raised in the 70s, 80s, California hippiness with this like serious University of Chicago hardcore, knows what he hears, knows what he listened to. So it was this great blend of these two things for me, that he could encourage me to experiment and showed me how to expand ideas. But also, when I was bullshitting, not knowing what I was doing, he would call me on it. Like, you don't know those scales, you don't know those. And
so you were trying to improvise something that you were supposed to know by lesson?
Yeah, and he'd go, you don't know what you know. Right. Stop. You just stop me.
Oh, I see.
So it was really great. It was, like I said, really open-minded, but also just, no bullshit too.
Right. So is that like your? Let's see. Well, it sounds like your improvisation was also a tool.
Yeah, it was. It was both exploration and defense.
And that's what I was trying to come up with. I got locked there for a minute there, but you were improvising from a very young age, but over time, So he was obviously a major influence.
Yeah,
in your beginnings to expand past the classical training.
Yeah, absolutely, and really open. And he has a very open approach to harmony and understanding how tones relate to each other and everything from their acoustic basis, from a just intonation perspective. Right. Okay. He's written a great book called Harmonic Experience. That I before that book was actually published, that was sort of how I started to learn harmony rather than the traditional way.
So he was teaching you that before he even put the book out.
Before he put the book out, right. Yeah. And it took me, I studied with him from age, it was 12 to 23.
Wow.
On and off.
You spent a lot of time with him.
I spent a lot of time with him. And I remember finally, it took years of explaining and re-explaining these ideas. And finally there was this point where I got it. Right. I was 21. It took a while. Right. And it was like the entire universe of how harmony works suddenly opened up for me, and you could see it not just in Western music, but how those ideas apply to all sorts of music all over the world. North Indian music. It sort of was all this sort of grand unified theory of harmony, really.
So you explored a number of different musics, different elements from different parts of the world.
Yeah. He was a disciple of Pandit Premnath. The master teacher of Terry Riley, Steve Reich, Mont Young, and Aladdin spent time in those circles. And so I was introduced to Premnath at an early age too. Went to see him sing. I watched him give Aladdin some lessons. Wow. So also being exposed to that incredible level of musicianship at a very early age, but also in a very close environment. Watching someone like Premnath sing at I don't know how much you know about him.
Not a whole lot, but I do know the name. I've seen.
Yeah, he was trained in this very specific tradition in North India. He ran away from home at, I think, 13 to go follow a particular teacher, and then was his sort of house servant for a while until the master teacher agreed for him to be a student. And then at some point when he had advanced enough, he left and in the north of India became a cave singer, which are these people that basically discard all worldly possessions and sit in these caves covered in ash, and they're sort of religious figures. And the local population brings them food, and all they do is sing all day, these invocations and these prayers in this particular North Indian style. So when his teacher was dying, he called him to his side and said, I want you to go to America and continue this music because it's going to die if you don't. Right. And so, he came and came to California, and a number of, in the late 60s, early 70s, composers and artists collected around him. So to be able to sit there in front of someone who was, he was in his 70s at that point and had this half century or more of music behind him. Right. And he sang very quietly. And at first, when you listen to him, it would take a minute to hear what was going on. It didn't reach out and grab you, but when you came to the sound, it would draw you in, and you'd hear this incredible delicacy and these fine, subtle variations of pitch and timbre, and this incredible mastery of it. So to be able to go to these concerts and sit 5-6 feet from this guy several times those were really formative experiences.
Very influential.
Very influential.
Yeah. Okay. So you have a lot of this world music element, you've got the classical element. So a lot of times I ask, what was it though that tipped the scale, like brought you into the realms of exploring past the forms, past the elements, into the, for lack of a better term, into the world of experimentation in sound and music?
Yeah, I guess all along when I was exploring those things, I always had an interest in sound. I mean,
Yeah.
before I even knew the words prepared piano or any of that
Sure.
stuff, I was damping strings and plucking and finding harmonics. So that was always sort of part of my language. And I always, like I said, my mother was an artist. Excuse me. And she'd bring me to all sorts of galleries and shows. So it wasn't until I was much older that I realized that there was a difference between, traditional landscapes and abstract expressionism. It was all sort of there.
Right.
All sort of what art was about. So with music, it was sort of the same way for me. I mean, I liked more progressive rock and stuff when I was in high school. But
Sure.
I always knew that there were these other ways of making music, and it was all sort of part of a whole thing. I sort of had to learn genre in some ways. Like put these specific impositions on it.
Right.
And say, oh, no, the language can only do this, and it can only do that. And I've enjoyed putting myself in those boxes at various times, but it was always with an eye to those lines aren't really there; they're fictions.
Sure.
And
of course,
what's interesting is
right.
things that cross them. So I think my battle has been sort of the other way than a lot of people. I didn't feel restricted and had to break out.
Right.
I was sort of always out there and had to find ways to confine myself to build up certain things so that I could release again.
Okay. But you play a lot of extended form in various live settings with a lot of improvisers who are playing to some extent on idiomatic stylings, So it sounds like it was this natural to you to just do that then, right?
Yeah.
Or is there influence on top of that?
Well,
from other areas.
There is influence. I mean, again, from allowing just listening to sound.
Sure.
I remember one day when he has these great prayer bowls, and we were outside his studio, and he just took me out and said, whack this. And he started hitting it, and we started picking out all the partials we could hear, depending on how we hit it and where we hit it. And he got me to hear all those kinds of things. So experiences like that. But also, in my late teens especially, I really decided to gain improvisational control over the piano and compositionally. I really wanted to study bebop jazz. So I spent some time studying with a teacher here at the jazz school, who now runs the jazz school. Susan Muscarella was my teacher for a few years. And got all the traditional voicings down and really put myself in that box. And there's sort of a natural progression of harmony that happens where you start with certain types of chords and then you add dissonances in, and then the denser the dissonances become, the more it becomes just a sound or a sound mass. And so sort of adopting for a while the mythology that jazz is about looking outside the box, I tried to follow myself a lot of those lines. Like, if this chord could do that, well, can it do this? And can it do this? And can it do that? And I found sort of that ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny, where, I had these chords that were 1947 chords.
Right.
And then I tweaked them like this. So, that's kind of what they were doing in 1952. And then you tweak them like this, and that brings you to 1960. And so I sort of, with some other musicians that I was playing with at the time, found this very natural progression towards free jazz. And then started to discover those players and say, they've taken these sort of infant ideas that I have and created a whole world with that. So that's where I got interested in the music of Cecil Taylor. And then ultimately met Glenn Spearman, and he was my other great teacher.
Right.
So that really opened me up that way.
Right. Okay. So you worked quite extensively, or you studied with Glenn Spearman. Yeah. Yeah. While he was here.
Yeah. He it started off again with an interest in Cecil Taylor, and I had known that Glenn had played with him, and so then I had met Donald Robinson also. Right. We played opposite each other at shows, at a show, and really liked each other's playing, and became friends immediately, and said, let's hang out, and I said, well, I want to meet Glenn, so he gave me Glenn's number, And I was really interested in these structural ideas of cell structure form, which I kind of knew about, but I didn't really know what they were doing. And so I called Glenn up, and apparently what I remember is, instead of just leaving a message, I started talking into his machine until it cut me off.
Right.
I was like, oh, okay. I'm that guy, you know?
Oh, exactly. He's listening going,
Yeah, but he was kind, and he called me back, and so his way at that time, he said, look, come in. The way it works, you pay me for 4 lessons. I teach you my thing. And I said, cool. So I went in, and he showed me the first lesson, and then I went home and came back the next time, and I think he was a little surprised, because not only had I practiced everything, I mean, he'd shown me these lines that he has. And the idea is you have these, for example, a small phrase that you're just given the notes, and the rhythm is dictated orally. And then he says, okay, and then you can use this phrase, you can turn it backwards, you can do all these different things. So I'd gone home and I had written out all the different transpositions and inversions and memorized them.
Right.
And was able to play, different ones with different hands. And so I came back, I was like, is this what you want? And he's like, okay, let's go to the last lesson. Okay. Now go get us some gigs.
Oh, okay.
So it's quickly moved from learning his forms, which was, he really introduced me to the sort of tradition of music. And then I sort of started working with him immediately. We got a couple gigs at Yoshi's with Rafi Malik and
I remember those gigs with Rafi Malik.
Yeah.
When he was here.
Yeah. It was a great time in my life. I mean, I was in my early mid-20s and playing with the guys who were my idols.
Right.
And I was the young kid. And
yeah,
it was amazing.
Wow.
Those are some incredible musical experiences.
So one could say that would be major influence of your
absolutely
movement towards the outer realm, so to speak.
Yeah. I mean, I like to think I always had a foot in it.
Sure. Well, it sounds like that. Yeah. It does.
But yeah, I mean,
I was trying to get the progression out of you.
Yeah.
So I can understand that. So our viewers can understand that.
Yeah.
What about? Because you said your mom was a sculptor.
Mm-hmm.
What about non-musical influence? Like, are there any areas of other forms of art that have also helped to nurture and draw you into?
Yeah, I've taken inspiration from lots of things. I mean, as we all do.
Sure.
Some pieces by Saul DeWitt maybe have this sort of process that's also just beautiful in of itself.
Sure.
Certain, I don't know, I read a lot of science.
Literature. Yeah.
Literature.
Yeah, John Sherlock was telling me that literature has an element in his compositional.
There was. I mean, I read a lot of James Joyce, especially. And then Robert Duncan, actually, I'd have to say Robert Duncan was really inspirational for me.
Okay.
He's one of the few poets I've ever read that I've felt like got the creative process.
Right.
And could speak about it in a way that was concrete, yet sort of mythological. And he just kind of I read it and it's like, that speaks something that I can't speak.
Right.
So yeah, Robert Duncan was a big influence, actually.
Okay. So, does that have any relation to your upcoming performance? I read something about resonating gongs and piano. Are you playing piano on that too?
I am playing piano.
Because I've heard different stories. Some people say, oh no, he just did all gongs, and I'm like, oh, okay. So, resonating gongs, or what do you call that? Electroacoustic?
Well, there's
a term.
There is a term.
Yeah.
The technical term is recursive physical object electroacoustics.
Oh, okay. I knew electroacoustics was in there somewhere.
Yeah. This is all part of some exploration I've been doing in the last 3 years.
So there's a visual element to this. And that's
why
I asked about when you said sculpture, and I started thinking your performance. So I'm just wondering, how those are there connections there? Because how does that set up, like in terms of your compositional element and how you're going to present this to the audience.
Yeah, it's a combination between a performance piece and a sound installation, basically. And the piece is derived from a sound installation that I just recently took through Europe. I had it in Prague and in Istanbul.
Okay.
And so now I'm tweaking it a little bit and expanding it to add piano. And this is going back to one of the formative elements.
Sure. Right.
Back to that banging of the singing bowl that I mentioned. That got me really interested in the nature of objects and our relation to them, and how that becomes embodied in sound, and how we sort of create music, which is supposedly this inner expression, but it's also determined by these exterior physical objects that we have a direct physical relationship to. And a lot of the inside the piano stuff for me is that. I mean, it's sound, but it's also tactical.
Right.
Tactile,
right.
Tactical too.
Yeah. Well,
but scraping and pulling and all those things are part of the whole thing. Physicality and music are not inseparable, to me at least, despite the acousmatic overlay.
Right.
And so this exploration with the gongs began about 3 years ago at the Center for New Music and Audio Technologies. And I developed a method in collaboration with some programmers and stuff here of taking these instruments and running white noise into them, and then running white noise through a little attached transducer, and then recording that and pulling that into the computer to map out all of the partials of the gong.
Okay.
So that I end up with basically a model inside the computer.
Does the gong also generates sound just
acoustically,
right?
When you run white noise into it, a wide band, it resonates primarily at its fundamental, at its different partials.
Right, because I heard that you attach resonators, and so they generate white noise.
This is just the analysis process.
Oh, okay.
So once I've got that, then I know what all the resonant and partial numbers, frequencies are of the instrument, so that I can basically control them. I can send a signal back in, like a sine tone, back into the transducer and excite the gong just at that particular place.
Really?
So I can create a form of synthesis, an additive synthesis. And then I also do things like I record myself striking it or scraping it, or this piece has me running my hands over the surface of the gong. And then I can take all those samples and manipulate them in the computer as well, doing, again, mixed forms of synthesis, and send them back into the cymbal. And so you get this cross between electronically manipulated but acoustically realized sound. So everything is acoustic, even though it's controlled electronically. So that's where the idea of recursive comes in. It's, you're taking the sound out of the gong, playing with it, and then feeding it back in, and then the gong is resounding. Wow. A term for a friend of mine came up with it. There's a similar thing with metal sheets. It's called re-embodied sound. So that's sort of the technique. Right. And I've done a number of these installations in festivals and spaces, and in collaboration with Hugh Livingston, actually, also. Right. Okay. And so that's the basis for the gong part of the piece. And I will have things are generated algorithmically. I mean, there's a set environments that you sort of move
So you've pre-composed, so to speak, those algorithms and the formulation to how the gongs will be attacked, so to speak.
Exactly. Yeah. I'm using Max MSP, which is we use that as a programming language, or object-oriented programming language. Right. And or graphical programming language officially.
It makes music.
It makes music, right? And actually, I'm really excited. I'm playing with this new technique that I've done this with installations before, but this is the first time I'm doing it with the piano. I'm sort of treating the piano in some ways like a gong, so that just as the computer is selecting certain groups of pitches or sounds and sending them to the instruments, it's also going to be sending me wirelessly on my iPad chords or other things that it's selecting at random that are going to match with them. And so I'm going to be able to draw from those to interact with the installation.
Okay, so the score then will be generated on your iPad, then you'll play the score? Is that what I'm hearing?
Basically, yeah. It's generated in the computer and sent to the iPad. Yeah.
All based off of your own tweaky programming.
Yep, I've got all sorts of interesting timing things.
Right.
If you want me to go into, I will.
No.
But there.
I want to leave some to the imagination.
Okay.
We want people to come to your show and say, so this again. I'm very actually excited to hear this because it sounds like this particular performance is a debut.
It is. It's a new piece,
which is great.
I'm still working on it right now.
Great, because I know that all the other pieces are also debuts.
Fantastic.
So the entire evening is a set of debuts.
Yeah.
And I have final confirmation of that. So it's good.
Well, I mean, it's a great opportunity.
Yeah.
It's like,
yeah.
And I've been wanting to do this piece, and it's just
Right.
I think it would be a great thing for the festival, and it's pushing me in a new direction, and this festival is sort of about expanding these things. So.
Yes, it is. We try to book things that are going to be unique or different, and we don't really care too much about whether or not it's going to fit the commercial spectacle or not.
Well, it's not.
So. Yeah, I'm so glad to hear that. And on that note, I'm going to leave us and let folks know that, again, Matthew Goodheart will be performing July 19th at the Community Music Center at the Outsound New Music Summit, and you can go to outsound.org and check out all the programs that we have over the year and see other episodes coming up as well on the YouTube channel. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
I appreciate it.
Great.